Welcome, you're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. As a response to growing threats and competition from Russia and China, by 2020, the White House plans to create the U.S. Space Force as a sixth separate military warfighting service. Vice President Mike Pence announced this during a Pentagon speech in the beginning of August. The decision is yet to be approved by the U.S. Congress. So what will this mean for international security? To talk more about this, we'll welcome in our studio today Dennis Gurak, Senior Fellow at the Potomac Foundation. Hello and thank you for joining.
Hello.
So let's clarify what exactly are going to be the activities performed by the so-called Space Force.
I would start a little bit differently, if you don't mind. Just to add to your thought that this Space Force is created due to strategic competition from Russia and China. So this was foreseen by U.S. National Security Strategy presented in spring, and where Russia and China are clearly defined as strategic competitors. Thereby, we now have a formal, declaration in the official document that basically Cold War times had begun again. The threats are obviously a bit different than 30 or 40 years ago.
That's obvious.
But to my opinion, the creation and the initiative is very timely because unlike in 90s and 2000s, Russia and China had started increasing their military expenditures, also concentrating on space efforts. So if we think of strategic threats that are coming out from space, they are very broad, actually. So starting from jamming satellites, starting from jamming GPS, finishing with lasers, which could be installed either on satellites or on the ground. This could be missiles directed at satellites. This could be satellites themselves, which are threatening other satellites, whether physically or by weapon.
So
this could be cyber. This could be hacking also, and this could be reusable, multi-used space vehicles. Now you see this technology existing already in civil domain, like with SpaceX, reusable rockets. So for military purposes, this could be also applied very easily. So
and the job of the Space Force is going to be what? To protect the United States from all those vehicles and cyber threats and missiles, or to foresee that it's going to happen? What's going to be the job of the force?
Okay, so there are four basic activities planned to that, which is creation of a Space Development Agency, Space Operations Command, and Space Center Command. So these are kind of the standard organizations or pillars of any United States or any other military in the world establishment. So it's not that nothing existed before and there will be billions and billions spent now for something starting from scratch. So the point is in more systematic approach. Like there is U.S. Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, and SOCOM. There is also there will be a sixth force created, so they will be combined from other forces, mainly from the Air Force, actually.
Speaking of that, all the other forces have vigorously fought the idea of actually creating the Space Force, because that meant that all of the space objects belonging to the United States are going to be given under the command of the Space Force and taken away from all of the other five forces, speaking of the Army, the Navy, and so on and so forth. So how is this going to change the whole defense structure of the United States, since all of the forces are going to be reformatted?
It's hard to say definitely right now. Now we know only the plan, but the final word will be for U.S. Congress to say. There was already a hearing in the House of Representatives, but it didn't pass the Senate to be included in the National Defense Authorization Act, which is kind of the defense budget of U.S. for this year. So now the plan is to do it in 2020 because actually this autumn in November U.S. Congress elections are approaching. Therefore, most likely this would be already implemented in 2020 at full scale. But, well, the opposition, of course, you know, like in any bureaucratic structure, that doesn't mean that, you know,
it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you know, U.S. doesn't take decisions like, like waking up one day, especially military ones.
That's true.
Yeah,
Let's imagine that the Congress votes for this idea and the Space Force gets created and gets implemented. How is this going to change the whole global structure of defense?
That would promote even more military spending, which is already happening. So statistically, if you analyze last decade, you see a very big surge in military spending worldwide. This is true for NATO and for all other countries. So this would increase even more military spending. I wouldn't say that it's per se a bad thing because there is disproportion in military spending between NATO and Russia and China for the last decade. Actually, the Wales NATO summit in 2014 was the first event where NATO actually agreed to start increasing military spending after a decade of decrease in military spending, and that's quite a strategic problem, mainly for the European countries. You might have heard criticism from U.S. to other European countries that they're not spending enough, etc. So this is all aimed at balancing, you know, global stability actually, and balancing the powers. Because while U.S. spends like $700+ billion yearly on defense, and Pentagon is the biggest employer in the world, having more than 3 million people, civilians and military. But and Russia and China combined spend like 200 billion, a little bit more than 200 billion. Their expenditures de facto are much less. You know, the prices, the costing is much less in China's planned economy and in Russia's defense industrial sector. They're much less. So they are developing quite intensively. Therefore, you see this Space Command creation, Space Forces creation. You see the resurrection of the Atlantic Second Fleet, which was announced also a few weeks ago. And there are other things which would be, which we would hear more in coming years, which are foreseen by the new national security strategy of the United States.
And wouldn't all this lead to a mass space militarization?
Well, we don't know much about that because it's all under secrecy vein. But there is no prohibition only for weapons of mass destruction. There is Outer Space Treaty signed during Cold War in '67, but there is no prohibition for conventional weapons. Hopefully, you know, it could lead to actually redrafting or, you know, modifying the convention in order to actually limit the use of space forces and space weaponry. So, unfortunately, you know, human brain works like that. If there is more threat, then you're bound, you know, to sit and talk at the table and reach agreement. If there is no threat, you know.
Okay. Well, if the force is implemented, what kind of message would U.S. send to China and Russia, and what would it mean to Ukraine?
It sends a very clear message to China and Russia that U.S. is considering them as strategic competitors. That's the exact wording from the security strategy. That means for Ukraine that we need to be in the trend, and we can be in the trend because we are one of few countries in the world that have space capabilities. So Ukraine could well be a partner for U.S. in that domain. Why not?
Thank you so much for coming
Thank you
and
so
clarifying the whole situation for us and our audience.
Thank you.
That was Denise Gurak. He's a senior fellow at the Potomac Foundation. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for the rest.